230 people vanished in 12 seconds. And for almost 30 years, a portion of the people who investigated it have refused to accept the official explanation. This is not a conspiracy theory video. This is the story of what actually happened, and why the truth turned out to be stranger and more troubling than almost anyone expected. July 17, 1996. A Wednesday evening, the summer air thick and warm over Long Island, New York. At John F. Kennedy International Airport, TWA Flight 800 is preparing to depart. A Boeing 747, one of the most reliable commercial aircraft ever built. Destination, Paris, France. On board, 230 people, families on vacation, business travelers. A group of high school students from Pennsylvania heading to France for a language program. Teenagers with their whole lives in front of them. The plane takes off at 8:19 p.m. 12 minutes later, it's gone. Witnesses on the ground see it first, dozens of them. People on the beaches of Long Island, people on boats in the Atlantic, people sitting on their porches in the summer heat. They all describe seeing the same thing, a bright streak of light rising from the water, moving fast, heading toward the plane. And then, a massive explosion, a fireball rolling across the sky, the aircraft breaking apart, pieces trailing fire as they fall into the ocean below. The calls to 911 start almost immediately. Within hours, the FBI and the National Transportation Safety Board are treating this as a potential criminal act. And why wouldn't they? The descriptions from over 200 eyewitnesses are almost identical. Something came up from below. Something hit that plane. It was 1996. The Oklahoma City bombing had happened just 14 months earlier. The Atlanta Olympics were happening right now that same week. A bomb would go off there in 10 days. America was on edge. The word on everyone's lips, missile. The investigation that followed would become the largest and most expensive aviation investigation in American history. The Navy deployed ships and submarines. Hundreds of divers worked around the clock in murky, dangerous Atlantic water, sometimes in near-zero visibility, pulling wreckage from depths of up to 130 feet. Over the course of the investigation, they would recover more than 95% of the aircraft, piece by painstaking piece, from the ocean floor. Those pieces were transported to a hangar in Calverton, New York, where investigators began the grim, meticulous work of reconstructing the plane. Like an enormous shattered puzzle, hundreds of thousands of fragments, months of work. And then they started finding something they didn't expect, traces of explosives, PETN, RDX. Both are chemicals found in military-grade explosives, found on the wreckage, found in the cabin. The FBI's own lab confirmed the results. Now the investigation shifts into overdrive. This looks like a bomb, maybe a missile, maybe a terror attack. The question isn't just what happened, it's who did this. But here's where the story takes its first, deeply unsettling turn. The explosive residue, the evidence that pointed so strongly toward a criminal act, had an explanation. Not a satisfying one, but an explanation. 3 weeks before the crash, TWA Flight 800 had been used as a prop in a law enforcement training exercise at St. Louis Lambert Airport. Drug-sniffing dogs were trained on the aircraft, and the trainers, as part of the exercise, had placed actual explosive material in various parts of the cabin. The material was supposed to be recovered afterward. It wasn't, not all of it. So the explosive residue that investigators found, the residue that had launched one of the most intense terrorism investigations in American history, may have been left over from a training drill that no one thought to mention when the investigation began. Let that sit for a second. Ray. The single most alarming piece of physical evidence turned out to have an innocent explanation, one that took months to surface, one that, if not for meticulous record-keeping, might never have been explained at all. But the eyewitness accounts, the streaks of light, those couldn't be explained by a forgotten training drill. The FBI interviewed more than 270 witnesses, people who had seen something in the sky that night. Their descriptions were detailed, consistent, and disturbing. A streak of light, reddish-orange, moving upward toward the plane. Then the explosion. To many of these witnesses, there was no ambiguity. They had watched a missile hit a commercial airliner. The CIA, of all agencies, got involved. They produced an animated video, which in itself is remarkable. The CIA making an animated explainer about a plane crash. But here's what they were trying to explain. Their theory was this: the plane did not get hit by a missile. What witnesses saw streaking upward was actually the nose of the aircraft already on fire, climbing after the forward section had been blown off by an internal explosion. The plane was going down, but to people on the ground, the burning fuselage appeared to be rising. It was an optical illusion. The witnesses weren't lying. They weren't wrong about what they saw. They were wrong about what it meant. Some people accepted that explanation. A lot of people didn't. So if it wasn't a missile, if it wasn't a bomb, what caused TWA Flight 800 to explode in mid-air on a clear summer evening? The answer, when investigators finally found it, was almost cruelly mundane: the center fuel tank. Flight 800 had sat on the tarmac for a long time before takeoff, with the air conditioning packs running directly beneath the center fuel tank. That tank was nearly empty, carrying only about 50 gallons of jet fuel. An empty fuel tank isn't safer than a full one. It's more dangerous. The space above the fuel is filled with flammable vapor. The air conditioning units had been heating that vapor for hours. By the time Flight 800 took off, the fuel-air mixture inside the center tank was sitting just above the temperature at which it could ignite. All it needed was a spark, and somewhere in the electrical system of that aircraft, in a fuel quantity indicator wire, in a pump that had been running hot, in a system that had known design vulnerabilities Boeing had been flagging internally for years, a spark happened. The center fuel tank ignited. The explosion blew the forward section of the aircraft off in an instant. The rest of the plane followed it into the ocean. 230 people, gone in the time it takes to take a breath. The NTSB released its final report in August of 2000, 4 years after the crash. The cause? An explosion of the center fuel tank triggered by an ignition source that could not be definitively identified. Probably an electrical fault. Probably the fuel quantity indication system wiring. Probable. Not certain. That word, probable, became the center of gravity for every argument that followed. Because here's what's true. To this day, investigators were never able to pinpoint the exact spark. They knew the mechanism. They knew the fuel vapor was ignited. They could not say with absolute certainty what created the ignition. In the world of aviation investigation, this is not unusual. These things are hard. Wreckage recovered from the ocean floor, subjected to massive mechanical forces, burned and waterlogged. Finding a single point of electrical failure is sometimes simply impossible. But in the court of public opinion, that gap, that small, honest admission of uncertainty, was a door left open. And through that door walked the alternative theories. Some came from credible places. James Sanders, a former police officer and journalist, wrote a book claiming the government was covering up a missile strike. He obtained samples of a reddish residue found on the seat fabric of the aircraft. He claimed it was rocket propellant. Independent testing later identified the residue as adhesive. But by then, the story had already spread. A group of former investigators, people who had actually worked the case, went public in 2013 claiming the official explanation was wrong, that the physical evidence pointed toward an external explosion, that their concerns had been dismissed. These weren't fringe voices, these were credentialed professionals. The NTSB reopened its review, examined the new claims, and stood by its original conclusion. Further, the 2013 moment did something important, regardless of where you land on the debate. It reminded people that this investigation had not been simple, that there were disagreements, that the people closest to the evidence had not all walked away with the same conclusions. Here's what made TWA Flight 800 so fertile ground for doubt. It happened at a specific, loaded moment in American history. 14 months after Oklahoma City, 10 days before the Olympic bombing, a presidential election year with Bill Clinton running for re-election. Some people have argued, and never stopped arguing, that the administration had political motivation to avoid a terrorism finding in the weeks before the election. Was there a cover-up? The evidence for an active, coordinated government conspiracy is thin. The investigation involved thousands of people. FBI agents, NTSB investigators, Navy divers, Boeing engineers, independent scientists. Keeping that many people silent, coordinated in a lie, over 3 decades, is extraordinarily difficult to believe. But was the investigation messy? Absolutely. Was evidence mishandled? Yes. Were there communication failures, bureaucratic turf wars, and institutional blind spots? Undeniably. That's not a conspiracy. That's just how large, high-pressure government investigations actually work, and somehow that truth is almost harder to sit with than a conspiracy would be, because it means the chaos wasn't malicious, it was just human. What gets lost in the argument about causes and cover-ups are the 230 people who got on that plane. Captain Ralph Kevorkian had 21,000 hours of flight experience. His co-pilot, Stephen Snyder, had been flying for TWA for over 20 years. They were professionals at the top of their field, and they had no idea, no possible way of knowing, that the aircraft beneath them was carrying a design flaw that Boeing's own engineers had known about for years. The fuel tank heating issue, the flammable vapor problem in low fuel conditions. This wasn't a secret. Boeing had internal documentation going back years flagging it as a potential hazard. The FAA had been slow to mandate fixes. After Flight 800, that changed. New regulations required fuel tank inerting systems, mechanisms that replace the flammable vapor above jet fuel with nitrogen, eliminating the ignition risk. Airlines around the world began retrofitting their fleets. That fix has saved lives. How many we'll never know. But somewhere on some flight that took off on some ordinary day, a spark happened in a fuel system and nothing exploded because of what investigators learned from the wreckage of Flight 800. That's what good safety investigation looks like, even when it's painful, even when it's imperfect. The students from Montourville, Pennsylvania, 16 of them, 16 teenagers who had spent months fundraising, studying, preparing for a trip to France that was supposed to be the adventure of their young lives. They were traveling with their French club chaperone. Their town has a memorial to them now, a small park. 17 names, the 16 students and their teacher, carved into stone. Their parents spent years fighting not just grief, but the grinding uncertainty of a cause that felt unresolved. Some of them joined the families pushing for continued investigation. Some of them accepted the official explanation and tried to find a way to move forward. Some of them couldn't do either. There is no version of this story where those families got what they deserved. A clean answer, a complete truth, a sense that the people responsible, whether that's a mechanical system, an airline, a regulatory agency, or something else, were held fully accountable. That's the weight that lives underneath the technical debate, the human cost of ambiguity. In 2020, the last pieces of the reconstructed fuselage, the massive physical artifact that investigators had spent years assembling in that Calverton hangar, were finally dismantled. The hangar was demolished. The physical evidence, the thing you could walk around and look at, is gone now. What remains are the documents, the photographs, the testimonies, and the questions that some people will carry for the rest of their lives. Here's what we know for certain. A Boeing 747 on a clear summer night with no distress call, no sign of trouble, exploded 12 minutes after takeoff and fell into the Atlantic Ocean. The most likely cause, the cause supported by the physical evidence, by the metallurgy, by the burn patterns, by the fuel analysis, was an internal explosion in the center fuel tank, caused by a spark in an electrical system flying a design that had known vulnerabilities. Here's what we don't know: the exact spark, the exact wire, the exact moment. And for some people, that gap, that thin sliver of uncertainty in a 4-year, $40 million investigation is enough. Enough to keep asking, enough to keep doubting, enough to keep the case open in their minds long after every official body has closed it. Maybe that's the right instinct. Healthy skepticism of official conclusions has served democracy well throughout history. Investigations do get politicized. Evidence does get mishandled. Powerful institutions have covered things up before and will again, but there's another possibility, a more uncomfortable one. Sometimes a plane falls out of the sky and there is no villain, no conspiracy, no one to blame in a satisfying way. Just a spark, just a design flaw that slipped through the cracks of a regulatory system moving too slowly. Just 230 people who boarded a flight that they had every reason to believe was safe. And sometimes the hardest thing to accept isn't a lie, it's the truth. The ocean off Long Island is quiet now. No ships, no divers, no searchlights cutting across the dark water. But on certain summer evenings when the light goes gold and the air smells like salt and heat, people who were there still look up, still wonder, still see a streak of light in the sky that they cannot fully explain, no matter what anyone has told them. Some questions don't close, they just go quiet for a while.